Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron, we're in Science in the Bible. Now, you're going to need to comment on the bottom, making sure we're on, that you, in fact, watch this video, write a little bit about the video. We're looking at reasons for a young Earth. We're on number 25, and it is spiral galaxies. Now, if the Big Bang, in fact, happened, there's a frictionless universe out there that, with the laws of angular momentum, should keep things just going in the same direction. We know that that's not happening. Things are moving in different directions in the heavenlies. But not just that. Walt Brown has shown that spiral galaxies, the way their arms are inconsistent with a Big Bang model. They should not, just because of the frictionless nature and, you know, the way gravity works and this type thing. It should be an impossibility, but here we have spiral galaxies. Shows the Big Bang didn't happen and a very young universe. Now, number 26 is really kind of multiple, but why is Darwin, Darwin's biggest proofs are all shady, all frauds, such as the Nebraska horses. That's considered to be, you have small horses, the big horses. Jonathan Wells really deconstructs that, and icons of evolution, because they're still horses. They didn't go from horses to T-Rexes or horses to woolly mammoths. They're all horses. The ape men fallacies, Peking man, Java man, Nebraska man, these other things, they're usually all shown to be frauds. They many times deliberate, Piltdown man, deliberate frauds. I'm looking at you, Pierre de Chardin. It's just terrible. The tree of life never happened. They'll have like the Darwin's tree of life, that we all came from a bacteria that came into everything. It looks great on paper, but when you go to do the specifics, it's impossible for the tree of life to have happened. The peppered moth, the fact that there used to be white moths on white bark, like white birch trees in England. When the industrial age hit, the pollution changed the bark to dark with all the silt, and then the moths turned dark. Well, first of all, they're still moths. So that's variation within a species that nobody disputes that happened. They didn't turn into Mothra. They didn't turn into Godzilla. They didn't turn into any of these things. They were still moths. Secondly, after doing the studies, they realized that the white moths, once that happened and they became exposed on the dark bark, became prey to the birds, and so the white moths just got ate, and then they would kind of live underneath the leaves and stuff like that, if my memory serves me correctly. And the dark moths that normally lived underneath the leaves then could live on the trees. Once the environmental movement hit, the trees began to get their whiteness back. Then the white moths were able to return because they were no longer visible prey. It was not a proof of evolution at all. So Darwin's finches, Haeckel's ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. My brother, who's relatively smart, got taught this in school in the 60s, that babies have gill slits in them, and that's the reason abortion is okay. They don't. It's a fold of flesh. We know this from the science of fetology, when, infrared technology, what they call ultrasound, came out in 1976. They don't. So we don't go through the evolutionary development of a fish and all this kind of stuff to a human in our mother's womb. That's shown to be terrible. And so Haeckel, he just deliberately misdrew the fetuses and the babes in the womb to promote this. And this is still in science textbooks in the 21st century. Even like Douglas Fukuyama, he didn't know it. When it was pointed out to him it was a fraud, he's like, oh man, I missed that. Sorry, science just misses stuff sometimes. It's called worldview. Anyhow, it's like if the press doesn't like a politician, they make mistakes, and it's never in favor of the politician. It's always, oopsie daisy. So Even Darwin's finches. First of all, Darwin's finches never turned into pterodactyls, giraffes, any of these things. So now we know it was just migratory instincts in times of famine. What could they reach down and eat? So the longer billed ones would come at certain times and the shorter billed ones would come at other times. So all Darwin's biggest proofs, if you ask Darwinian evolutionists what's the biggest proof, many times they'll go into these. That. All right, number 27. Beauty, leisure, belief in God. If it's really just a dog-eat-dog world, survival of the fittest, why would we stop and look at a sunset when that may kill us? Why would we stop and smell a flower when that may kill us? Because of predators all around. Why would we paint? Why would we have art when all of these things would not further the species, not help the gene pool? Because we're created in the image of God, and He's the author of beauty. But that's another proof of a very young earth in creation consistent with the Word of God. Dendrochronology, which is tree ring studies, and so the oldest trees in the world go back about 4,400 years to the time of Noah's flood. Trees never die unless there's external circumstances such as disease, bugs, or lightning strikes or burn. Things such as the coelacanth. This is something, it was a fossilized fish. It was supposed to be extinct for 30 million years till they started catching them off the coast of South Africa and other places. And so now coelacanths are considered to be not extinct, obviously. This happens constantly, where things that they thought were extinct, they find them not extinct at all. All right. The Rockefeller and Basel University study where they just determined last 2019, I think, where two evolutionists said they were surprised because they found that 90% of all species on Earth arose spontaneously 100 to 200,000 years ago. And so that really, I've done a couple videos on that, really destroyed evolution. As a matter of fact, I've had evolutionists in a panic on the YouTube channel just saying all kinds of stuff and saying, if you can show me that, either you're a liar or I'm a liar. If you can't show me that in a secular publication, then I'm going to call you a liar. But I'll call myself a liar if you show it to me. So I went to phys.org and posted the link for him. And so he went to something else. I said, wait a second, you just said you're a liar. I said no such thing. Well, I guess liars continue to lie. I'm not sure. Okay. Another thing, number 32 of a young Earth, there is no meteors in the Earth's strata. If the strata was laid down over the course of billions and hundreds of millions of years, meteors hit the Earth on a fairly regular basis. Like if you've ever been to Arizona, the big meteor crater there. But yet there are no meteor fragments in the strata layers, showing that it happened very rapidly, like during Noah's flood. The oxygen problem for the beginning of life, it takes oxygen for, let's say, a one-celled organism to live, but scientists say it could not have developed from inorganic matter or non-living matter through ammonia and electrical strikes and all of this unless oxygen was not present. So you have, with the Miller-Urey experiment and others, you have the oxygen dilemma. It couldn't have formed, the first living cell couldn't have formed with oxygen, but then it couldn't have lived without oxygen. So it's the oxygen dilemma. We've already went over irreducible complexity. I did want to go into Mendelian genetics. He was some type of like a friar or a monk, and he basically determined that no matter how you did, whether it was roses, whether it was dogs, that you can have Pekingese, poodles, all the way up to Great Danes and all types of dogs, bulldogs, but they're still dogs. They still have the same genetic materials. And so there's a variation within a species. You could breed cows, Hereford cows, Brahma bulls, all types of cows, but they're still cows. And so Mendelian genetics showed us genetic walls. Louis Pasteur, with his famous Pasteur beaker, showed us that there was no such thing as spontaneous combustion. That up until the 19th century, mainstream scientists thought if you had a pile of clothes in the corner, that mice just formed in the piles of clothes. That if you left meat out for any appreciable amount of time, that maggots formed from the meat. And this was known as spontaneous generation. Not combustion, spontaneous generation. I need to write my note better here. Generation, even though my pen's not writing well, sorry. Spontaneous generation. And so he made a beaker where he would like put a piece of raw meat that could still get air in it to rot, but it was made in such a way that maggots could not get to it, and showed that it did not. And it was such a big deal. Like you had Helen Petrovna Blavatsky, head of the Theosophical Society, and the person who succeeded her, Annie Wood Bezant, they were putting spells on Pasteur because they're like, well, this destroys the theory of evolution. We need help here. The laws of biogenesis, we've already looked at the laws of information technology, that information only comes from information, but life only comes from life. There's actually a law, scientific law, laws of biogenesis. Life does not just spontaneously come. And then we've talked about lunar recession, but crater creep. The craters on the moon are constantly the dust and the dirt, the moon dust from them. I've got a little bit of moon dust, believe it or not the stuff you buy at the store. And it gradually fills up. And so they can say, well, these craters should have this much moon dust on them, and it's called crater creep, and there's not. So it leads us to know that the moon is a very young entity. There's actually a lot more proofs of a young Earth, but that's just some of proofs of a young Earth. Now, dealing with atheists and evolutionists on a very regular basis online, this is their presentation of their best arguments. Their very best argument that I constantly get is that variation within a genetic structure proves evolution. And they will argue, this is like an article of faith with them. It's a religion with them. I mean, you have index of prohibited books you can't go to, you have thoughts you can't think, you have thought crimes, you have words you can't say, you have people you can't watch, you have, again, the index of prohibited books, you got things you believe by faith, because it's definitely not there by by evidence. You have your holy works, Darwin and all this. But they would say that variability within genetic structure, they can't comprehend, maybe they're blinded or something. And so many times when I've talked to them, I've never been able to convince one that genetic structures have walls, that yes, there's variability, but there comes a point where it stops. It's like certain animals can crossbreed, like lions and tigers produce a liger, but then it stops. They become sterile at a certain point, like mules and these type things. They become sterile at a certain point, and because it can't go any further. And so that's a huge argument for them. Secondly is red shifting. That Edwin Hubble, who I think he just actually took like dirt and rocks up Mount Palomar when they were building it, Mount Palomar Observatory in California, and eventually became some big-time astronomer, and they named the Hubble telescope after him, actually. But he's the first discoverer of redshift. That there's many explanations for redshifts, but one of them, and maybe the predominant scientific view currently, is that this is the result of the Big Bang and things are moving outward. And so you have to go into a lot with the redshift with them. Thirdly is long ages. They would say, well, the Earth is for a fact 4.6 billion years of age. But when we went into the various dating methods, strontium, thorium, carbon-14 dating, uranium, all of the different, there's 21 basic different dating methods, all of them have different assumptions that it started out with 100% of that substance, when we know Adam and Eve were made to be 30, and plants didn't start, chickens came before the egg, so things were created with the so-called appearance of age. I don't want to get into all that because people call God a liar for doing that and all this. No. And so he may have created some rocks with their half-life already half done. Nobody said that it all started out that way. And secondly, that all things continue together from the beginnings of the world until now. This was like Cuvier, the geologist, that was his contention, when, even though he had some various cataclysms and things mixed in there, he had long ages. But like the flood, okay, so water would severely impact these dating methods. And that much water, that much pressure, and atmospheric changes before and after the flood would greatly impact. So the environment, it hasn't been a sterile environment. It's been a changed environment. And then the missing links. They would say the very few, I had a guy attack me, because Colin Patterson from evolutionist from the University of Chicago, he's world renowned, he said all the missing links in the world would fit on this table in front of me, and he said this is like the dirty little secret of evolution. This guy says, we've got more missing links than that in Georgia, and you're a liar and all this. But now, unless he answered and I didn't get it, when I said, can you give me examples? I never saw the examples. Now, he may have answered and I didn't see it, but I never saw them. He was like, in the state of Georgia, I'm a paleontologist here in Georgia, I find missing links all the time. There's missing chains, not missing links. Now, lastly, we're going to go into the flood. In Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9, there was a flood that hit planet Earth. Over 30 times, it's mentioned that, every creature under heaven. This was not a local flood. This was a worldwide flood. A lot of proofs for that. There's a KT layer that goes around the world. A layer of silt that's all around the world that really proves a worldwide flood. Secondly, water seeks its own level. So, if you're burying 10,000 foot mountains in the Middle East, it's going to be 10,000 feet around the world. Fraser, who wrote The Golden Ball and all this, he was no friend of Christianity, but he said there's 427 separate flood legends around the world, and many of them have enormous correlations with Noah's flood, like the Chinese language, the symbol for boat and eight and all of this harkens back very much to creation and to Noah's flood in Eden, and all this. A lot of things, there's books written on the Chinese language and creation. You can get that off Amazon. I looked several months ago, you could. Anyhow, so the flood was not localized. The flood was universal. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of man. Jesus' coming is not going to be local. It's going to be worldwide, the rapture of the church. So there's a lot of proofs that it is worldwide. The flood, this is where fossilization came from. This is where strata came from. The ark was probably, it was the dimensions mentioned in the Bible, but cubits before the flood were probably much larger because people were larger before the flood. So cubit being from here to here, traditionally 18 inches. There's 3 different cubits mentioned in the ancient world: Babylonian cubit, Egyptian cubit, Hebrew cubit, 21 3/4 inches, 26.5 inches, 18 inches. So it could have been at least a 26.5 inch cubit, maybe more than that. Plenty of room. All the species that would have been needed on the flood would take up about 110 railroad cars, but yet it had a minimum of capacity of 550 railroad cars. So the flood occurred, and it's just engraven with the tales of Atlantis. There's even a Greek mythology, Noah. It's graven in the hearts of people all around the world that they know in their mythic stories that there was an archetype, a real flood that occurred. So we're going to let that be the end of Science in the Bible 2. Please comment, and we'll be getting with you through email with our TA to show you how to complete the rest of this course. But watching this from cover to cover, stem to stern, is part of it. God bless. We love you. Talk with you later in Jesus' name. I hope everybody's safe from COVID. God bless you in Jesus' name.